Good to have you with us, Ed Schultz, News and Commentary. You've got to be living underneath a rock if you have not been following the coverage everywhere on Hurricane Irma. It is bigger than the state of Florida. I mean, think about that. All right, now there's going to be relief. The Senate has voted for $15.25 billion. The vote was 80 to 17 that they're going to extend the debt limit. They're going to get hurricane aid to the folks down in Texas. And, of course, they're set to do something for the folks in Florida. I don't mean to be critical here in the 11th hour before this storm, but why doesn't the federal government do something about the gas supply? Why should there be any shortage of any fuel if they've known for days that this was going to be the mother lode of a storm, and have FEMA just purchase a bunch of gas and sell it back to consumers so at least the gas stations are going to be full? I just don't understand that. The evacuation on I-95 in Florida it's bumper to bumper. It's amazing that there haven't been really any social unrest through all of this. But this is going to be a bad one. There's no doubt about it. So we're going to have coverage from Marina Portnaya tonight, who is brave enough to stay in Miami and cover this storm that's coming up. Is this bipartisan agreement real? I want to go to Mike Papantonio, Ring of Fire radio host and host of America's Lawyer on RT America. Mike, good to have you with us.
Ed, how are you?
I'm doing good. I want your take on, is this a bipartisan effort, or is this something that Trump just had to do because it was a hurricane? Like, for instance, Paul Ryan, Speaker of the House, he was slamming it yesterday morning. Today, he's praising the fact that the president has done this, and hurricanes, of course, don't discriminate against Republicans or Democrats. How do you think this plays out?
Well, I think it plays out. Well for Trump. I mean, Trump. This isn't the money that they've set aside for this. If that's your point, is not. It's not even close. When Florida gets hit with this hurricane, I mean, I don't think it's going to be quite the caliber of what we're seeing with Harvey in Texas. But I mean, you're talking about mass destruction on some of the heaviest residential areas along that east coast of Florida. I mean, Miami. You've got people. Last time I was in Miami, you can't even see the water. There's so many skyscrapers and condos. So I mean, the impact of this is phenomenal. You know your point though about the fuel that has been asked down here. You know, understand the U.S. government's got a reserve for these very types of things. Well, I mean, what do you use the reserve for? This is a national emergency. There should be no question about the fuel. You've got people running out of fuel along 95. They're having to pull off the road and find out how they're going to go any further. It's been orderly, but it hasn't hit yet. And when it gets closer, I'm not so sure we're going to see the same thing.
I thought they shut down oil production and gas production or limited it in North Dakota because there's such an unbelievable glut on the market in the world. What the hell's going on?
Well, first of all, understand this. I'm a little cynical because I've seen this so many times. You know, I've lived in Florida all my life. I've been through some of the worst hurricanes that have ever hit the country. And so I see this happen. And I want to say, you know, you've got people who are not above gaming the system. Now, the argument that we're hearing now is, gee, the refineries and the refineries all along the Texas coast are the ones that were hit. They're not usable anymore. Therefore, that's part of the problem. Every time we drill down, every time we take a look at this story, it always comes down to somebody saying, this is an incredible opportunity. You have two of the biggest states in the union that are going to, you know, and you're going to start seeing prices start skyrocketing. I mean, it's just all what's available. Since
when do you believe the oil companies? I thought they had all these tankers that were parked offshore because they couldn't they didn't have enough refining capability.
Yes. Well, I got to tell you, the oil story that's going to come out, this is going to be a big, interesting, there's going to be a lot of destruction story coming out, but we're going to get a real first-hand look at how this industry operates. And we do that every storm. I mean, I can't think back on any major hurricane where this discussion has not come up. Gee, they're gaming the system again. I would tell you, especially in Florida, understand there's clear access to the roads in Florida, especially coming in.
Yeah.
If they really wanted to get oil and they wanted to get gas and fuel down here, they could do it. But the real problem is, you understand, the U.S. government has this bounty. I mean, it's just huge amount of reserve, and that's what it's used for in situations like this, especially when you have oil companies that are gaming the system.
I'm surprised that Governor Scott hasn't asked the federal government to get fuel down there. I mean, I've watched his press conferences. He seems pretty comprehensive, but that's one thing that's missing.
Well, that's really no surprise to me. You know, look, I got to tell you something. This story. If you go back and look at the last, I'd say, 2 major hurricanes, and you do some research on them, this fuel story comes up every single time. There's always a crisis. And it's not just storms. I mean, it can be virtually any kind. You know, it can be too cold. Well, there's a fuel story. It can be some type of event that takes place where you've got some cat in a 3-piece suit sitting in a Wall Street skyscraper that says, "Gee, you know, we don't have to really game it that much, and we're going to make billions." And that happens all the time, especially down here in Florida.
Mike Papantonio, Ring of Fire radio host and host of America's Lawyer on RT America. Mike, I want to ask you about DACA. What do you make of the president doing this? Is he doing this because he really wants to deport people, or is he doing this because he wants Congress to get off their ass and actually go to work for a living? What do you think?
I think this is such an interesting move. This move with DACA is about the only time that he's really looked like a sly politician to me. He's put himself in a position where he can't lose, and whatever the outcome, the blame is ultimately going to fall on somebody else. He's given Congress 6 months to come up with a fix for the program before it ends, a move that makes the Breitbart crowd happy because they were the ones pushing for the stricter immigration rules. And by shifting that responsibility to Congress, he gets to blame them if they can't come up with a fix, and we start deportation. And if they decide to give in to his demands and they fix DACA and he gets funding for his border wall, then he gets everything he wanted there as well. So there's really no downside. This is a very smart play by he's played this very smart.
Well, I was going to say that I think this is probably the most politically savvy move that he's made. Now, I know he's pissed off a lot of people, but I don't think they're deep into the politics of what the ramifications and how this could play out. I actually think that Trump deserves credit on how he's playing this. It is up to Congress. They can't do anything on immigration unless it's legislatively put together. You can't executive order your way out of an immigration problem. And that's what I think a lot of people are missing.
Yeah, people believe that with one wand, he can, by way of executive order, do what he wants to with DACA. It just doesn't work like that. You know, the interesting thing about the truth is the U.S. doesn't even really have the resources at this point to deport nearly 800,000 immigrants in the next 6 months.
Yeah, he's not going to do it.
Yeah, there's no huge threat for those deportations. Actually.
You know, a lot of liberals are pissed off because, you know, they're using these people as bait to get Congress to do something. Let me tell you something. Don't be offended. Senior citizens have been used for political bait for years. This is just the way Washington works.
Children, the military, senior citizens, go down the list. It's a checklist that arises every time.
Exactly. All right, let's talk taxes. It's the easiest thing to get done in Washington. They got the House, the White House, the House, and the Senate. My take, and I said this yesterday on this podcast, that there will be no tax reform, that the corporations love paying no tax, what Bernie Sanders talked about on the campaign trail time and time again, and their lobbyists are working overtime on a lot of these Republicans to make sure that they do the dance, but they don't buy the ticket. And that this tax reform that they're talking about, I think, is a red herring. It's not going to happen. If there are any changes, they'll be moderate. It won't be sweeping in any stretch of the imagination. What's your take on this?
I think you got it right. I mean, it's both parties, Ed. I mean, you've got the Democrats that aren't even, I mean, I can't even tell the difference between Democrats and Republicans where it comes to issues like tax. You know, it's almost sickening to see the argument, it's reemerging in D.C., the same tired trickle-down talking point that it's going to work. Trickle-down's going to work. We've heard it since the 1980s. This morning, Paul Ryan actually was on the air talking about the failed attempt to this failed attempt of trickle down. He knows it doesn't work. He's not an idiot. But the truth is, corporate America loves it.
Yeah.
60% of Americans believe that corporations and the wealthy in this country don't pay enough taxes. And you know, I got to tell you something. They understand that corporations are parking their money offshore. I was really interested when Trump, about 2 weeks ago, started saying, you know, we got to get that money back in here. I started saying, God, he's starting to sound like he's really
a Democrat.
Yeah, exactly. But, you know, at the end of the day, you're right. The Democrats have no interest in moving tax issues. They want status quo. The current tax reform package from Paul Ryan is going to give most working families, $42 a year. And meanwhile, anybody making more than $3 million a year are going to receive hundreds of thousands of dollars. Nothing really changes. Democrats aren't going to change it. Republicans sure as heck aren't going to change it. It's status quo.
I'm holding up in front of the camera your latest book, Law and Vengeance. I don't know where you get time to do all of this. You know, you got the biggest cases in the country. You're writing books. You're doing TV shows. You're doing radio shows. Yeah. I don't know. Do you ever sleep? But I mean, I sleep. I will tell you, I used to not sleep, but I do now. Anyway,
I know you a little better than that. I don't work as hard as you do. Let me put it like that.
Well, I don't work as hard as I used to. I'll admit it. I mean, I was a firewall dude there for many years, but you know, I just like the gig I got right now. But it's like you're pumping out a book every 2 weeks. The latest one is Law and Vengeance. Tell us about it.
Yeah, it's a book it's a true story that's been fictionalized, just like the first book. The first book sold really well, I think, because there's stories that simply aren't told. Corporate media will not tell these stories. They will not tell a story like Law and Vengeance is a story about a weapons manufacturer that was had a government contract with a product that was completely defective, actually did end up killing people. So it's a case that we actually handled. The government covers it up. The company covers it up. Department of Justice covers it up. Nobody takes action on it. So we actually handled the case. These books kind of write themselves because they're true stories. They're fictionalized. Some of the characters are completely fictional. Some of the events are completely fictional. But the underlying story are stories that you will not hear on corporate America.
Yeah.
You don't get to talk about it. And so my hope for this series of books, this is the second book in a series of 4 books, Ed. And my hope is that a reader comes away thoroughly entertained, and at the same time they learn something about what's happening around them in their lives that corporate media is not telling them, the government sure as heck isn't telling them, and they have no reason to know about it until they sit down, maybe lay on a beach and read a book like this.
Yeah.
And so that's kind of the goal of this whole series. It's called the Law Series. Reviews on this one have been very good. Publishers Weekly handled it very, very kind to it. And so I'm very optimistic about this book. I hope people will read it because it'll tell them a story. It'll tell them several stories that they simply don't know about the Department of Justice, for example, how dysfunctional that's become, about the weapons industry, about how whistleblowers are victimized, about how we're really at the edge of corruption almost every day, and we've got a Department of Justice that does very little other than to fine people a couple of $100 million, slap them on the wrist and say, go do it again.
Okay. Leading trial lawyer and television host of America's Lawyer on RT America, Mike Papantonio, Ring of Fire radio host, a man of many talents. Law and Vengeance by Mike Papantonio. Pap, always great to visit. We'll do it again. Thanks a lot.
Thank you, Ed.
You bet. This is Ed Schultz, News and Commentary, today's podcast. Thanks for listening.